Geek Therapy Radio.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I know I said that I shouldn't mention that this is the Geek Therapy Radio podcast because you already know it's the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You subscribed to it and you clicked it. It's an old radio habit. I don't think that I'm going to get out of it. Just accept that most shows are going to start with welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. So, welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You've got your mental curator. My name is Johnny Hemberger. Couple of maybe just one quick area of house cleaning. As of recording, since these are typically, like I said, I try to keep about 5 podcasts per week when I can. Things get weird and crazy, and it's sometimes impossible for me to record a podcast every weeknight, but I will try. So I should say, welcome to Geek Therapy Radio podcast, up to 5 podcasts per week. So this week is definitely not going to have 5 podcasts. I don't know how many podcasts I'm going to have this week, at least 3. So there's 2 that I'm recording today, tomorrow, and then I will put together the radio show, which also gets podcasted later this week. So 2 podcasts to begin the week, and then a few days in the middle of no podcasts. You may not hear from me at all of those few days. And for those of you keeping track, it's because I am going on a much needed mini vacation on Wednesday. We are going to the river, the Guadalupe River. We have a little cottage out there. Me and my wife and my little nugget in her belly are just going to relax for a couple days before immediately coming right back into the grind. We weren't able to have an anniversary. We weren't able to go anywhere. Haven't taken any time off. You guys know that I've been working a lot over the pandemic. I've expressed that I've actually felt guilty for working so much because I know a lot of people are not working or they are furloughed and they don't know when the next paycheck's going to come from. They don't know if they're going to get fired or not or laid off. A lot of people have been laid off. A lot of business have closed. So I've expressed, as you can tell again right now, that I feel almost guilty that my workload has almost doubled since the beginning of the coronavirus. I couldn't take any vacation days. There's not people available to work. But I have set aside a couple days this week, 3 days this week, Wednesday through Friday, and then of course I have the weekend. I've taken a few days off, and my wife and I are going to relax on the river. I'm bringing my portable charcoal grill. I told my wife I'm planning to use that grill breakfast, lunch, and dinner each day that we're there. We're only going to be there for 3 days. 3 days, 2 nights. Wednesday, and then Thursday and Friday. What is it? Maybe it's 4 days? 3 nights. I think it's 3 nights, actually. Yeah, okay. We get there on Wednesday and we leave Saturday. And you know what I'm going to do? I am going to lounge in the water. I'm going to lounge on the dock. I'm going to take a nap on the dock. Hopefully not a nap. Well, I'll take a nap on the water. That's a safe bet. On the water. I've got my dinghy, and I'm going to take it out there with a 100-foot rope and just tie it to the dock and just sit there and list in the nice little swells of the river, the little waves lapping up the side of the boat, me just laying there. Oh, plenty of sunscreen. Got to figure out some way to cover myself. I think I'll be snoozing in the shade. There's 2 levels to the dock. There's a deck above the water. Hang a hammock between the 2 posts. It's going to be awesome. And despite many fibers of my being wanting to record a podcast and let you know what's going on, I need to disconnect from work. You'll remember what happened last week. I've taken that podcast down, by the way. I did a little rant podcast, and I was I'm not going to dive into it right now, but I was very unclear with my desired intentions in that vent and rant. I brought up the the explosion in Lebanon and Beirut, and I was talking about political bickering on the internet, and somehow I tied the two together. It was not, I should not have done that, and my intentions were misconstrued. So it's just another reminder, our emotions get the best of us. Since I've deleted the podcast, you know my heart. You know where I'm coming from. You know I would never be intentionally ill-willed towards anybody or make light of any situation. But I just didn't feel like I was clear enough about that in that recent podcast. And so rather than leave it up, I decided to take it down. That was never the scope of Geek Therapy Radio anyways, to start comparing political arguments to devastating explosions and loss of life. That's not what Geek Therapy Radio has been about. Yes, we're all human and we all need to vent, and I will rest assured vent on this show from time to time. I just don't think I did an adequate job explaining myself, and I just thought, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and take this down for now. I still have the audio of it. Just didn't feel right. Just didn't fit right. So there's that. But I'm going on vacation. Few days, unwind, not think about the podcast. I'm going to bring the drone. Going to fly that drone around the river. Rest assured that there will be a video coming out of this. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know what sort of tie-in. It's gonna be 100% tied into the therapy part of Geek Therapy. It's just gonna be a relaxing video on the river if I even decide to put a video up about it. But I am bringing the drone. I'm sure anybody on Patreon, at minimum, would see the drone footage if I don't release it to the rest of the world on YouTube. Either way, I'm going to enjoy it, and I'm going to keep myself from sitting on the dock and recording a podcast. I just don't need to work. I need to go on this vacation. People need to go on vacation so they don't work. And as much as I love Geek Therapy Radio, as much as I love doing this, it's still work. It takes energy and effort. I don't want to spend a few hours on a vacation sitting there recording and editing and posting and all that stuff. I'm just going to relax. Just going to go out in the river and relax and engage in my own geek therapy there. I'm not even going to talk about the 286 in this episode. Progress on the 286. All I will say is that I've checked my tracking information from eBay, and I know I'm going to go home today and find that I have 2 real-time clock CMOS batteries, the Dallas 1287 chips, or their equivalent. I think it's, Symphony SL 1287. They're replacements for the old battery and clock chip for old 286s and old motherboards. 386s, 486s, they were used in a multitude of different motherboards. So I finally have those 2 chips waiting for me at home. I desperately need them for this ongoing project with the 286, the Compact Desk Pro 286C. I did go to Micro Center recently and pick up a couple of adapters that I needed, a Molex to floppy adapter. I picked up another SIBA compact flash to IDE card. Since I have a 286 and a 386, I need 2 anyways, and I was able to get up and running. It was beautiful, and I promised I wouldn't go into too much detail about this update, but I just did. So let me just move on to the meat and potatoes here that I will timestamp. In this episode of Geek Therapy Radio podcast, I want to talk about cars a little bit, but in a creative way. Not any specific car. I'm not going to talk specifically about my DeLorean. I'm not going to talk specifically about the MR2 Spider I used to own or any of my past cars in general. But we're going to talk about cars in general, specifically design of cars. And hopefully this will interest not only those of you who are fascinated by cars or like classic cars or fascinated by design by cars, but also artists and designers. I think this is a topic that envelops both of those groups of people. If there's a Venn diagram, car enthusiasts, and then another circle, artists and designers, there's a little overlap. And right in the middle, it's us geeks who geek out about both things. I was watching a Top Gear on YouTube a few hours ago. It was I specifically look for the Top Gear episodes that have something to do with vintage cars, old cars. You know, there's that series that they did where they were each given, I don't know how many years ago, 10,000 British pounds, and they had to buy a mid-engined Italian sports car and basically drive it something like 90 miles to a strip club, I think it was. And it was basically a giant cautionary tale about just because you see an exotic car for 10 grand doesn't mean you should ever buy an exotic car for 10 grand. And they proved that in marvelous detail in Top Gear fashion. But I like those kind of clips because I am a sucker for old classic cars. Driving the DeLorean. So there's an episode where this is specific. It's specifically what spurred this idea. There's an episode where Richard Hammond is driving a Ferrari Daytona from Milan in Italy, I think, to the French Riviera. Is that where he's driving it to? He's driving along the Italian coast into France to a bar or a pub on the water in France. And he's taking the, what year is it? 1970 something, if not maybe a little earlier, Ferrari Daytona. Forgive me, I don't know the year. By the time he was driving it in this episode, which may have come on over 10 years ago, it was 40 years old in that episode. So 60s, 70s, probably a 70s, blue Ferrari Daytona, 4.4 liter V12 Italian sports car. GT, a grand touring car made for doing those kinds of trips. And James May took a $1.4 million speedboat, basically. So there's a part in the show where it's Richard Hammond inside the Ferrari Daytona commenting on how beautiful the car is, that despite it having heavy steering, despite the clutch feeling like it was out of a 10-ton semi-truck, that really wasn't what it's all about. It's how it looks, and even though that it has heavy steering and a heavy clutch, that it's the driving experience is unparalleled. You get this experience with old cars that you don't get in modern cars, and I 100% can attest to that. But I will add one caveat. The DeLorean, as much as I like driving it, does have a heavy clutch that feels like it's out of a semi-truck and does have a heavy shifter. You're shifting through 5 gears. There's no power steering, nothing's power assisted. And while that is a beautiful thing that links you to your car, that when you shift gears in the DeLorean or any old car, you feel every nut and bolt and linkage in your hand. And when you steer, I can drive over a dime on the tarmac with the DeLorean, and I can feel it in my hand. Versus a modern car, you can't. Sometimes you don't feel if you drive over a rock. You're so disconnected from the road. So the caveat I will add to the old car and all the feel and the experience, and this is what it's all about, and it's great driving experience, and we'll never experience this again in many modern cars, especially your daily drivers, slosh boxes getting you back and forth to work. The mystique and the allure of driving a vintage car is that you can feel everything and you can smell everything, and it's glorious connection between driver and the road. That's all great. Double thumbs up, 100% agree. It's a phenomenal sensation. But when people go off on rants like that about how connected you are to the road in an old car and how great it is to an old car, they always leave off the part that makes it so great. The reason why it's so great, and maybe you know where I'm going with this, the reason why it's so great to drive an old car like a Ferrari Daytona is because you get to get into a modern car later. It is so much easier to drive modern cars. It's so much more comfortable to drive modern cars. You have so many more creature comforts, air conditioning and power steering and power brakes. And if you do have a 6-speed or a manual transmission, even the clutch pedal is power assisted. It's all so nice to drive modern cars. It's so nice. It's like petting a kitten versus driving an old car is like bull riding, basically. Yeah, well, yes, bull riding gets your blood pumping and you feel alive and part of the world, but like, what makes it so... Bull riders bull ride because they don't have to ride a bull all the time. You know what I'm saying? They like bull riding because they like when they're not on the bull. It feels better not to be on the bull. And you know that you only have to ride that bull for a maximum of 8 seconds or however long you can hold on to it. Then you go get to sit down in a nice cushy seat and air conditioning and drive your nice cushy car home. You don't have to be on the bull all the time. If you had to be on the bull all the time, you would wish for death. And that's kind of the same way that it is driving old cars. Oh, it's really nice to do once in a while, but if there are some people out there who daily drive DeLoreans, and I'm speaking about DeLoreans because that's currently the oldest car that I own. I've had old Beetles, old DeLorean. I still have the old DeLorean. I love driving the old DeLorean. I did daily drive the DeLorean. I daily drove the DeLorean because that's the only car that I delivered pizza in the DeLorean. I daily drove and delivered pizza in the DeLorean, not out of choice. I never intended for the DeLorean to be my daily driver, but for a few years it was. And let me tell you something. I just yearn for the day. After a couple days of daily driving an old car, man, I cannot wait till I get into a car built after 1985. A more modern car. I was in high school around the turn of the century. That sounds weird. 1999, 2000, 2003, 2004. So when I finally got a 2002 Volkswagen GTI, which was still a 5-speed manual transmission, 3 pedals as God intended, it was so much easier to drive than the DeLorean. I love driving the DeLorean once in a while. There's few things better than driving an old car once in a while. That's what makes driving old cars so wonderful, is that you don't have to drive them all the time. There's a reason why cars advanced. Speaking of cars advancing, this is the artistic design side that I want to talk about. Regardless of how easy it is to drive an old car, a 1970 whatever Ferrari Daytona, a 1983 DeLorean, I don't think anybody who's driven a Countach would say it was a wonderful drive. Lamborghini Countaches are notoriously disastrous to drive, especially around town. If you're not on an open road cruising along at 100 miles an hour, apparently Countaches are sucky because it's a big car, no power steering, very low visibility, very harsh. It's not a car for driving around town daily driving. But here's where I'm going with all of this, and here's specifically what I wanted to talk about. The Lamborghini Countach and the DeLorean and Ferrari Daytona and other Ferraris, 308s, Testarossas, all that stuff, they may not be the most pleasant to drive day to day, but they are undeniably, well, I guess it's a matter of opinion, undeniably gorgeous, or at the very least bit striking. Some people think the Countach is gaudy and hideous. Some people don't like what the DeLorean looks like. Some people may not like what the Ferrari Daytona looks like, but they are all striking vehicles. The Lamborghini Espada, the Lamborghini Diablo, all of that stuff. It looks gorgeous, but specifically more vintage cars than that. Any like the 80s, 70s, 60s, 90s is kind of car enthusiasts generally, unless it's Japanese car, generally try to forget the 90s. There was not much great coming out of Europe and the United States or anywhere else in the world in the 90s. It was kind of bad, generally speaking. Not all of them, but generally. Yes, you had the Dodge Viper. Yes, you had the Lamborghini Diablo. There were exceptions to the rules in the 90s, but generally, cars in the 90s were bad and looked bad. Boring is a better way to put it, because of all the regulations. You know, I think the 90s is where we really saw the ramping up of designing cars to fit the ever-expanding and ever-changing safety regulations. Yes, that was happening throughout the 80s. Yes, that started happening in the 70s and arguably the 60s. Volvo was the first manufacturer to include seatbelts as standard equipment in their vehicles. Before that, most manufacturers, most vehicles, seatbelts was an added extra if they existed at all, if they were offered at all. It used to just be a bunch of bucket seats, no seat belts, and just the safety was don't hit anything. Don't hit anything, and you won't need the seat belts. It's kind of, yeah. So the 90s is where things got a little bit more bubbly, a lot more soft. I mean, we're not even talking about emissions, but emissions regulations. I'd say probably in the 90s, we started to figure out how to make catalytic converters and make the engines breathe a little easier and still meet restrictions. The DeLorean was famously choked by U.S. emission standards, in an engine that should have shipped with around 200 horsepower was strangled down to 130 horsepower. That's neither here nor there. I'm just setting up the premise that regulations started to dictate more than ever the way cars could be designed in the 90s and even through the 2000s until modern day 2020. So yes, we do have cars today that are beautifully designed. I would argue, just because I have a point of reference, because I own this vehicle, that my 2010 Audi S5 is as beautiful as a car could be in 2010. As a normal car could be. Yes, you have Paganis and Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all these extreme things. But 2010, that era, the B8, technically speaking, the chassis, B8, Audi A5, S5, RS5, designed by De Silvia. He said it was the most beautiful car that he's ever put pen to paper to. He's ever put pen to paper to design. He thought it was, and I you know what? I'm not going to say the A5/S5/RS5 is the most beautiful car ever, but it certainly was the first car to strike me as far as something that you could actually drive every day and have it be modern, be modern and safe and everything. It's a very classy, timeless design for a coupe. It's simple, but it's muscular. I have always described it as Dwayne Johnson, The Rock Johnson, in a well-tailored suit. That it's going to look good, it's going to fit the part. You can roll up to a fancy event, go to a fancy dinner, have your car valeted. It look really nice, and it fits in that setting. It doesn't stick out or stand out as being anything garish or unruly. It just looks really good and fits in anywhere. But since it's got a snarling 4.2 liter small block V8 and a 6-speed manual transmission straight from heaven, straight from God's design table, that it was muscular and powerful and could throw down at any moment that it needed to. It looks good, but it could throw down when it needs to. Like a wrestler, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. That being said, there's the difference in car design throughout the ages, and I'll draw a very simple line here. Modern cars and old cars, wherever that line is, depends on your interpretation. But I'll go back to the 70s and what Richard Hammond was driving, that Ferrari Daytona. And I will also use a modern car, and I will use a 2020 Ford Mustang. Let's just say Ford Mustang. Hopefully I remember that I mentioned Ford Mustang in this scenario. That Daytona in the 70s, late 60s, that whole era, cars, because of the lax regulations, because there weren't many regulations back then, somebody could sketch a car on a napkin and have it in production within a few weeks, basically. The fellas over at Lamborghini could sketch a new Lamborghini, and if they liked it, if they all voted on it, they could have it in production within weeks, within days, really. They could start hammering the metal and put together a car based on those exact designs within weeks. Richard Hammond commented that the Ferrari Daytona that he was driving, they drew it up, and 7 days later, it was in production. They started building the car, producing the car. It took 7 days for Ferrari to approve the design and put it into production. And basically approving the design was, we like the way this looks, make it. Whereas now it would take months or even years, if ever approved, a car design. all the reworking that has to go into designing a car now in modern days to fit safety standards. You see the A pillars and B pillars and C pillars are monstrously thick now in cars. It's hard to see around sometimes because they have to be super strong, super rigid, super structural. Many times they have to house airbags and curtain airbags and side impact airbags. Cars have become, and it's not a bad thing necessarily, they become safer and all of that and more high tech. But De Silva, let's just say, when he was designing the A5, let's just say he didn't sketch it out on a napkin and Xerox it and send it to Audi and say, build this. I promise you it went under revision after revision after revision after revision because Audi went back to him saying, well, you need to change this a little bit to meet this requirement. The headlight here looks really cool, but it has to be this certain way so that it passes rules and regulations in Europe, and it has to be a different way to pass rules and regulations in the United States and other markets of the world. We've tested your rear end design of this car, and it works really, really, really well in Europe, but the Americans like this design. We've tweaked it a little bit. We like this design a little bit better. So if you could design something back here, your design's good, but can you just tweak it a little bit to fit the test markets, to let people enjoy it more in different markets, but also to meet safety regulations. Oh, we need to put this here. This is required for the vehicle. You need to alter your designs X amount of times over X amount of months, possibly years, to get this car into production versus a Ferrari Daytona that took 7 days to go from design to production, to having the production started, at least. It's good that we have safety regulations and that cars are much safer nowadays, but I don't think anybody would argue with me that car design has lost its soul. For most cars, for most vehicles, the soul is gone. Not just because of all the safety regulations, because there's no way in heck these days that you could draw a car on a napkin and then put it into production within a few days. That can't happen. Sorry, something in my throat. It would be impossible. Cool design, but you forgot that we need the A-pillars a certain width. We were using this steel. The materials we're using, the company is bound by the materials they're used. They're bound by what their factory can produce. They can't just go out and buy a whole bunch of carbon fiber or exotic materials just on a whim like that. It has to be cost effective. You have to use what we got. Design what you design and use what we got. So the modern Mustang, it looks really cool. I think it's definitely the coolest looking Mustang since maybe the Mach 1. There's an era in the 70s when the Mark II Mustang, I think, is it the Mark II Mustang? Was terrible. You know what? I'm very polarized on the Fox body Mustangs too. I think they look god awful, but that's just me. A lot of people love Fox body Mustangs. Love them. I think they are hideous. That being said, I love the design of the DeLorean. A lot of people love the design of the DeLorean, but there are some people who think the design of the DeLorean is hideous. They would call the Lamborghini Countach hideous, the Ferrari Testarossa hideous. To each their own. The modern Mustang looks great, but you know that was nowhere near the first draft of the modern Mustang. Nowhere near it. Things had to be flared out, bulged, lines had to be stretched, things had to be made to fit airbags, things had to be made to fit crumple zones and expand this for safety, and you need to put a bar here and a girder here, and you need to have the A-pillar so thick so that if the car's on this roof, it won't crush. All completely understandable, but all reasons why cars have lost a lot of soul and artistic flair in modern times. I hesitate to bring up, oh gosh, compact SUVs. sport utility vehicles, they're just the scourge of automotive design. Every compact SUV, crossover if you will, looks terrible. It's a potato with four wheels underneath it. I don't have any problem with people buying crossovers or compact SUVs. My big beef is that they all look exactly the same. Exactly the same. If I had to drive a crossover, a part of my soul would die. I hate driving something that looks like everything else. And if I am going to drive something that looks like everything else, I would much rather have a sedan that handles better and you can still have fun with. You know what the perfect car is? It's not a crossover. It's not a compact SUV. It's not even an SUV. The perfect driver's car, if you need utility, is a station wagon. And there have been some awesome station wagons over the year. Audi has made some awesome, the Avance, awesome. Giant V8, bi-turbo V10, whatever station wagons. Cadillac has even made it, like a CTS-V wagon. Awesome. Station wagons that can do 180, 200 miles an hour, just amazing. Because you get all that performance, all that drivability, and tons and tons and tons more cargo space and utility than a compact SUV or a crossover. People tend to buy crossovers, A, because the seating position is a little higher, and sitting a little bit higher makes you feel a little bit safer. 2, because of the misconception that it can hold more stuff versus something else. Now, yes, can it hold more stuff than a smart car? Can it hold more stuff than a Volkswagen Jetta or something like that? Maybe. But it definitely holds equal to, if not less than, the amount of stuff a station wagon can carry. Station wagon has so much more usable cargo room, so much usable volume for things, for bikes, for kids stuff, for child seats, for all that stuff. But it has it's a sedan. It's just a sedan with a big fat butt. So you get all the driving dynamics of a sedan. You can even have all the driving dynamics of a sports car. And carry the kitchen sink, literally. You can carry the refrigerator in a lot of station wagons. Even small station wagons, you can carry a good-sized refrigerator inside of. Versus most compact SUVs or crossovers, there's no freaking way you're going to get something that big into it. I think the other reason why a lot of people buy crossovers and compact SUVs is that they think it's tough, or they think they're going to use it more than they actually wind up using it. And they think they're going to go off-road with it. They think they're going to do all these sorts of things and extreme things with it. I would like to know I can go off-road if I need to. You're never going to go off-road with this. And I don't mean to be antagonistic. I'm just being entertaining right now. This big, tough Jeep SUV that is clean as a whistle, slowing down to 2 miles per hour over every railroad track. You convinced yourself at the dealership that you were going to take this thing off-road and get it muddy and go camping with it and do all these things, but all you've ever done with it is go to the grocery store and gone over a speed bump. That is the most tilt on any of its axis that 90% of SUVs and compact SUVs and crossovers will ever experience, is that little bump over the speed bump in the grocery store. But a lot of us delude ourselves in the dealership. It's just tough. It's gonna go off road. I can go over rocks and mud and take it camping and haul things with it and do all sorts of extreme things. You're never gonna do that. You're never gonna, and you don't, and you never will. It's weird. Okay, so I live in Houston. There are a lot of jacked up trucks around here. Jacked up trucks. And they're driving down 59, I-10, 45, doing 110 miles an hour, jacked up, rolling coal, doing all the stuff. Those are driveway queens. I have known enough owners of those vehicles that would almost literally shoot you dead if you ever tossed a fleck of mud or dirt towards their Ford F-350 or their Ford F-250, King Ranch, whatever. Holy crap, getting mud on it. They get the vapors and faint. No truck of mine will ever have mud on it. Then why'd you get it? You poser? You're not going to do anything with this truck. One small caveat is that we get hurricanes in Houston, and that's the only time ever in the history of time that those big jacked up trucks are ever useful and needed. We are very thankful in this city for Joe Blow with his truck with a 5-foot lift on it and gigantic 48-inch tires, whatever. Yeah, it was useful. It was useful in Hurricane Harvey. It was useful in all the other hurricanes that flood. It's useful in floods. But that's the only time your car is ever going to see dirt or high water. Ever. You're not going to be hauling things with it. You might haul a boat once a year with that thing, maybe, even if that. And I know it sounds like I'm being harsh and whatever. But again, I'm just being silly with this. I'm just being facetious, really. Because overall, doesn't matter what I think. Doesn't matter if I think Fox body Mustangs are gross. Doesn't matter if I think crossovers and compact SUVs are dumb. It doesn't matter if I think that a $75,000 truck with a 4-foot lift is pretentious and the driver's a poser. It doesn't matter, because people can buy what they want. And just because I don't like it and I wouldn't buy it doesn't mean that they don't have every right in the known universe to spend their money how they want. They love that thing. They love that big jacked up Ford F-250 that'll never see mud. They love it. And they have every right to wash a dead bug off the windshield as soon as it hits and keep it sparkly and clean. It's not for me, it's just not something that I can wrap my mind around. For me, if I bought a big jacked up truck, I would be out there mudding all the time. I would be tearing it up. I would be coating it with mud, having fun with it, serving its purpose. And that's the reason why I always tout station wagons as being so great, and it's sad that they don't offer more station wagons in the United States. It's because 90% of the time, all you're going to be doing, if not 100% of the time, all you're going to be doing with your vehicle is going to the grocery store and going to work. I know that about me. I know that I'm only going to be driving my cars to the grocery store and to work, but I also need it to carry stuff, so I'm going to a station wagon fits that bill. I'm never going to take this thing off-road, so a station wagon is perfect. I don't delude myself to thinking I'm going to get more use out of something than I don't. Not with cars, anyways. I delude myself plenty in other areas. That's what geeks do. I'm convincing myself why I need this thing. Honey, do you really need this thing? Let me think of a reason why I do. Let me justify this purchase somehow. But a big giant car, you got to get real sometimes. And the crossovers have become so popular in the United States and over Europe and elsewhere in the world. Crossovers are huge, are very popular. People buy them, and manufacturers are going to build and sell whatever people are buying. So it makes sense. Crossovers, no one's coming in looking. A lot less people nowadays are coming in looking for a sedan or a station wagon. They want the crossover. They want the feeling of security. They want the higher driving position. The bulk of crossover and compact SUV buyers could care less about standing out in a crowd or how the thing looks. As long as it doesn't look offensive and the price is right and they get the high seating position and they can carry whatever they need to carry, that's all on the checklist. Most people aren't car geeks. And that's completely acceptable and completely knowledgeable. I can't go around talking to a random person in mixed company about an old 286 or a 386 IBM compatible computer. They're not going to care. They may not even know what I'm talking about, but most assuredly, most people in mixed company won't care. But to get back on point and start wrapping up, it's undeniable for both good and bad reasons that no longer can you sketch a car idea on a napkin. I remember we were all kids once. I can't speak for girls because I wasn't a girl, but boys, we used to draw cars with rocket engines and all sorts of wings and all sorts of crazy stuff. Now, of course, that's not going to make it to reality, but sometimes we used to just sketch more reasonable cars that could possibly be manufactured, really crazy looking cars. Homer Simpson did it. Homer Simpson built it. But we can't, there's no hope of drawing a car on a napkin the way we want it and having it actually be put into production these days. So car designers, for better or for worse, have to learn to design within the rules. That being said, limitation does absolutely breed creativity. There are cars that come along once in a while in modern times that are truly beautiful or polarizing or striking to look at, and you can tell this was the person's vision from the beginning. This is pretty close to the person's vision from the beginning. But gone are the days when somebody at Ferrari could sketch a coupe on a napkin and then have it in production 7 days later. That can't happen today. So we should appreciate what we've had, preserve that history, keep it going, preserve examples of it, but also be thankful for modern conveniences and modern design and what designers have to do with modern rules and regulations. It's very cool. That's all I wanted to talk about. Thanks for listening to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. And you are also worthy of your own self-confidence, your own self-respect. Embrace your geek thing. Share your geek things with others. Others is all we have. We are all we have. So be safe. Take care of yourself. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.